Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Unraveling the Journey to Love. Today we have some very special guests. They are my spiritual parents. They have just been such a blessing in my life. They have awakened me to true love and have loved me unconditionally, and I'm excited to have them with us. This is Allessia and Dave Edwards.
Hello, hello.
How's it going?
And today we're going to talk about women speaking in the church. This is a hot topic right now, and I really wanted to just take some time and just share the historical context of these scriptures and really just come from a place of love and understanding of what Paul was talking about and how Jesus valued women and used them in mighty ways. I think it's important for us to really dive into the original context of Scripture. And so today we're just going to take you guys along that journey with us.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I think the idea of women in ministry has been often misunderstood. When we were preparing for this session, I was listening to one scholar kind of articulate it like this. We feel like, especially in our culture, which is westernized American worldview, which is entirely separated and detached from the way that the biblical writers would have thought. We have a totally different way of thinking and seeing and perceiving. When we think about it today, we kind of look at it through the lens of something called recency bias, where we're comparing our present experience or the experience of the last couple of generations as it relates to women in ministry, and that creates a filter through which we end up examining the scriptures from. And he said we kind of view it from the lens of a feminist thing or or a women's liberation thing, when in reality, the idea of women being able to minister, to share their heart, to be able to teach other people the things of God, the treasures of his heart, it's not about a liberation thing. It's about the gospel, and the gospel seeing male and female as equal. And, as we'll talk about in a minute, that's the blueprint and pattern found in creation. But as you said, understanding the world surrounding the idea of a woman's place in ministry has to do with her place in the home, has to do with her place in the church. It's not just compartmentalizing everything down to a specific medium through which she can speak or not speak. I mean, where does the church end? Inside of a building, outside of the building, in the home, outside of the home. If the home and the family is the model, then can women teach her own kids? Like, where do we follow this trail? How far does it go? But in particular, the church is the ecclesia, the assembly, the gathering of the people of God, the body of Christ who gather together. What does it look like in that setting? And as you said, the historical context is really key, but understanding, how we approach it, how we look at it, not as a liberation thing, but as like the gospel, the good news. We need to look at it through the lens of the nature of God, not from a rule book or a rule code, but from his heart in creation and his heart for men and women and their relationship as they reflect his image in the earth. They both reveal and reflect a part of who he is, and both voices are vital and necessary if you want to see the full exact image of God, right? You look at the life of Jesus, what is he doing? He's seeing male and female equally. And you look at the pattern in Genesis, it's male and female equally. And if you have that arc, it's going to allow us to understand what happens in between, and both what happens in between and what comes after.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. Anything you want to share?
No? Let's dive in.
So I thought we would start with something I learned at Candace School of Ministry with Dave and Allessia early on, was that the Bible was not written to us, but it was written for us. And I really wanted to start there because if you're like me, I had never never been told that. I never knew to look at it from that lens. And now, years later, I realize how valuable and important that is. I had never been taught to really do my best to study the historical context, what was happening and what was going on with women, and or just any part of the Bible. So I really wanted us to just start there.
I want to add that, like, just within the church, I think it's so common that people take the Bible super literally and for face value when there's different types of literature and all of the beautiful things that we can get from it. But the historical context, like, that's actually was so transformative for me personally as well, realizing, I grew up in church. So that's how, you read it. You just read it for face value and try to understand it. Something that was written so long ago to someone else, like as it was written for me, and it can get confusing. So I love that we're going to start here and talk through that.
Yeah, it can get confusing, and everything transforms when you learn to read it through a different lens.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that Dave also taught me was that the Bible is a library; it's not a book.
Yeah, the Bible is a collection of something that was written over a 4,000-year period. And the word biblia, means library. Some people say it means the book, but it's the book or the library. And, there's a thing called the biblical meta-narrative. And that's the story that starts in Genesis. It unfolds all the way to Jesus and then all the way to Revelation. It's the bird's eye view, right? And so you have to, we live in a day and age to where the biblical canon's complete. So we have the opportunity to see the biblical narrative in from the beginning, right? Whereas the ones who were living at the time, they were just experiencing it kind of in that slice of time. That's called, there's a certain type of exegesis. I can't pull the word. What is it? Engaged, diachronistic, and what was the other one? Synchronistic, right? So synchronistic exegesis is what it meant in that day and that time. So, like, for example, the book of Daniel. What did Daniel mean in his day, specifically then? And then you look at that almost like a scene in the movie, right? So in order to understand that, you have to understand what comes before it and what comes after it. And so if you look at the whole film strip together, that's diachronistic exegesis. That's what it meant across time. And then there's engaged exegesis, which is kind of like the world within the text. Like, what kind of reality is that creating? How can I interpret that reality and then apply that reality to my life? So when you see this big picture, you realize that synchronistically, there's certain stories that were only describing that time. For example, the Old Covenant has law codes, and it has a law code, as a lot of the other Mesopotamian cultures had. But then they had certain rules within that law code that were either religious principles or civic, right? And so a lot of times we get confused. We'll pick up the Old Testament and read something like "Don't eat lobster," which was a civic code, and we'll think it's a religious code. It has nothing to do with us today. That had to do with a specific environment at the time and not being able to keep that food clean. And therefore, it would make you sick. It's very practical.
Yeah.
And then as time moves on, things, get revealed. And Jesus is like, hey, Peter, go have your fill of, or you can eat lobster feast down at Red Lobster, right?
Yeah, he's like, call nothing unclean that I've made clean.
Correct. And Peter has a hard time with that. But things like that in the Old Testament, we often misunderstand it or misread it. And we fail to because we're trying to take that one slice of time and make it apply as it applied to them, apply to us today.
Yeah.
It doesn't apply to us today. Well, it's the scripture, it's the word of God. We're supposed to obey everything in it. Now, it's an inspired text that guides us towards the Lord, and if we understand the bigger picture, it helps us make sense of the smaller pieces. That's called the hermeneutic circle. It's the forest and the trees and the forest. And so when we begin to see the bigger picture, like I said before, it'll help us make sense of things that are general and things that are specific. When it comes to women in ministry, there's only 2 verses that we're going to discuss later that kind of sound like Paul's prohibiting it. But those are specific stories in time where Paul was addressing a certain thing. They weren't the general consensus that the Old Testament tells us. They also weren't aligned with the pattern that we see in Genesis at the beginning and the creation of Adam and Eve. And all of that ties together. I mean, some of the things that Jesus does and that Paul does, if we read them alone synchronistically, then we'll focus in too much on them. But they weren't speaking out of the void, so to speak. They understood everything that came before them. I mean, obviously Jesus is God, so he's the one who inspired the writers of the Old Covenant. And then Paul was the foremost teacher in Israel his day, the student of Gamaliel, right? And so he knew the Old Testament inside and out. So the things that he would say, yes, they applied to his generation. However, they were also in alignment with everything that had come before and revealing the fullness of Christ within the question that the Old Testament asked and how it's answered in the heart of Jesus. So look at the life of Jesus, how he treated women. Then you're going to understand Paul much better.
That's good. That's really good. So one of the simple things is that we should never just read one Bible verse, which is what Dave is describing, that we should read the whole context, the whole chapter. And so I just wanted to lay that foundation for you guys, and then we're going to dive into Genesis. When I was sitting with the Lord, he took me back to the beginning. And I love going back to the garden. And my mom, my spiritual mother, is the one who taught me about the garden. And so, yeah, I would love to hear you on this part.
I think it's something that we always are often just turn straight to the Gospels, and that's where we hang out. But if you really want to get started, you have to go back to the beginning. What is his blueprint for creation? What is his heart? And I'm gonna grab my Bible just to have it and have it open. And so, going back to creation and how God set everything up, right? And Adam, he talks about creation in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Genesis 1, like Dave was kind of saying, is like the bigger picture, like the bird's eye view. Genesis 2 actually zooms in and gives a lot more intimate details of what was happening. But we see in Genesis 1 where he is creating everything, and he creates the birds and everything, and then he creates Adam. And then when he creates Adam, he actually, it's the first time when he's creating everything, he says, it is not good, right? He's like, throughout creation, he creates something in the water. Oh, it's good. He creates the birds. Ooh, it's good. He creates Adam. And then he's like, oh, it's not good because you're alone, right? And so he wanted to create a helpmate for him, correct? And so then, in Genesis 2, it talks about how God, puts Adam to sleep. So Adam was created, he was created from the dust, but then God creates Eve from Adam's side, right? He puts him to sleep, and he actually forms her from his substance.
Yeah.
And so that's, I was reading this book. I'm going to recommend a book. I recommend a book. This book is Equal. And it's actually talking about the very topics that we're talking about, and it goes into detail. I think this is Katya's doctorate. But it was just talking about, how, God presented all of the animals to Adam. And a lot of times in this conversation that we're having, people will use that as saying, well, Adam was in authority and he was just naming the animals because of authority. And it was an authority thing, and he was naming them and giving them, their function. And so is the same with Eve. But she was saying in here, I think what God was actually doing was showing Adam, right, that there was nothing suitable for him as a helper, right? The birds and all of these things, as he was naming them and giving them their function, it made him realize, wait, I don't have a partner. I'm without. And so it's from that place that God's like, you got it. Exactly. And so then in Genesis 2, as he forms him, then Adam looks at him and is like, whoa, this is it. She's bone of bone and flesh of my, flesh of my flesh. And she is my suitable helper. And in 2, when it talks about helper, it uses the word azir. And that is something of topic. Is azir is often used throughout the Bible, not as a just someone to help. Like in our society, it's just like, oh, they're just our helper or whatever. But this is like the strength. And 18 times, I think 16 or 18 times in the Bible, the word azir is actually used for God. And the other times it's actually used as like an army, like a military thing where it is like a strength. So Eve was actually to be a strength and a help, an equal partner, right?
Yeah.
Because she was taken from his side and we see that also like reflected back into Jesus as he pours out his side. We won't go there right now, but it's just a beautiful picture of creation. And then like God actually gives them both the mandate and says, hey, you go multiply, be fruitful, take dominion. He doesn't say, Adam, now you're in charge. Your wife, needs to just follow you. He actually gives both of them the mandate. And I think that's a beautiful picture. It's not until after Genesis 3, when the fall happens, that he says, oh, you guys are going to be in some friction.
Yeah.
And so I think that going back to this is like, okay, what happened before the fall? This is what Jesus is coming to restore all these years later, and we see it reflected in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, God didn't create Eve as a lesser species.
Right.
Adam had observed all of the other species and found that there wasn't one on his level, right? And so Eve was created co-equally. Adam was, some of the phraseology there for rib has the understanding of like Adam almost being split in half, right? And so it's male and female. In creation, you have this idea of ones becoming twos, so twos could become one. You have creator and creation. That's why humans are always looking up. They're always looking for that thing that they were created for. They were made in God's image, and we'll never find rest, peace, identity, joy, happiness, or fulfillment until we realize that we have our place at the Father's table.
Yeah.
And that we have a place inside of his own heart and his own life. Heavens and earth, one became two, so two could become one. That's why heaven and earth, the separation there is only in our minds.
Yeah.
The separation from creator and creation is only in our minds, right? And so that's why male, female, husband, and wife is the pattern for creation. It reveals the fullness of Christ. They're always drawn to each other. And in that picture, you see in humanity equality. There's not lesser than. Lesser than, separated thinking, as Allessia just said, only came after Adam and Eve demetanoiaed and partnered with the idea and the understanding of good and evil, good and evil, good and evil. There's good and evil, then in order for me to feel good about myself, I must identify and classify something else as evil or lesser than or below. And when you don't know the fullness of your identity because you haven't captured the realization of who God is and his nature as it is good, it is good. It's not good for man to be alone, right? You have two creation accounts in Genesis, and the first one kind of sums it up. When he created male and female in his image, he says it's very good. And then Genesis 2, you zoom in and see the process of that. But in Genesis 1, when the author is giving kind of the bird's eye view of it, the very good is encapsulated. And so also when we're thinking about like the qualities and the attributes of male and female, I have different attributes than my wife, right? There's things I can do that she can't do. There's things that she can do that I can't do. And it doesn't mean the things that I do are better and she's my supporter, right? It means that the things I do differently. She doesn't not try to do the things that a man does. I don't need to try to do the things that the female does. It's those two things working in harmony that when they both come together, they reveal the true image of God. They reveal the Trinitarian family of Father-loving Son, Son-loving Spirit, Spirit-loving Father. And to take part of that equation and to say that one is subservient to the other is to trade love for an outlet of a hierarchical relationship rather than a co-union. I can't have co-union if I believe that something's lesser than. And if you look at different cultures and religions around the world, they have actually partnered with a reality. And even in the letter to the Ephesians, Paul says the mystery of Christ is revealed through the union of husband and wife. And so if I'm looking at, Well, let me just address that real quick, because some people say, well, it says, Christ is the head of the church, just like the husband is the head of the home. Well, what does that actually look like? How can the husband be the head of the home and lead? Okay, well, the answer to that is found in the next verse, and it says the husband has to lay down his life for his wife. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
So how do I effectively lead the home? Well, I die and let so that the wife and the kids may have the fullness of what they need. So again, that speaks back to what I was just talking about. We're created equally, but we do have different characteristics that work together in harmony, right? And so God's intention as creator was always for his creations to identify and find their home in him. Jesus is unique because he's both God and man, 100% God and man. And so when he comes and identifies with our earthly side, he reveals to us our heavenly side. Mm-hmm. Jesus took on our humanity to restore divinity to our identity. And so the thing I'm kind of rambling on, I'm like, don't ramble, and I ended up rambling, is to capture the idea that in Genesis, in Jesus, and then Paul begins to extrapolate on it. So he's following the line of biblical meta-narrative from Genesis all the way to his epistles. He's actually liberating, revealing, and restoring the woman's place in family, in society, and within the church and the ecclesia.
I think one more thing about the image
beautiful.
of God is that, like, if we, male and female, are created in the image of God, then until we are actually seeing the fullness of the woman, we are not seeing that part in that heart of God, right? And I think that is something also just to keep in mind, is like, there is value in that. Like, if we are created in his image, there are parts of God that only a woman carries, and there are parts of a man, and until we can, and really every individual, until we can actually stop and acknowledge that, like, wait, I see this part of God because I of a woman.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we talk about this all the time, that I think in order for us to function the way that we are designed to in our true identities, we have to understand exactly what we're talking about, because the Trinity carries the woman part of God as well, as far as nurturing, comfort, the Holy Spirit. And so if that's lacking and that's being considered less than in the natural, then it's also being considered less than in the spiritual.
It's true.
And so we're not seeing the fullness of our heavenly family in the earth.
And that's the heartbeat behind everything that Jesus does and Paul does. They understood this better than we're trying to describe it on this podcast.
Yeah.
If I empower my wife to thrive, then she makes me more of a man than I've ever been.
Wow.
And if she empowers me to thrive, then she discovers the fullness of her womanhood. Mm-hmm. And you can only do that if there's an equal trade, equal value system, if both people bring something equal to the table. Mm-hmm. And that's the beautiful blueprint that we find. And obviously in the Old Testament, they strayed away from that to a degree, you know. However, as Allessia points out, women did have a place in society. Mm-hmm. They had inheritance and they had things like that. But it was largely just as the Father said to Adam and Eve, because men were created with the stronger physical bodies, they began to lord that over the females. Mm. But it doesn't mean they're more intelligent. It doesn't mean that they're greater than. It just means that they're different. Part of the man's role is protector. Yeah. Part of the man's role is provider, right? Yeah. It doesn't mean the woman can't protect and provide in her own right, but that's how it works in harmony. With our daughter Emma, she comes to me for strength and she goes to Allessia for comfort. Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes that's reversed, and she does come to each one of us for the different characteristics that we can all possess, but you do see certain qualities and strengths, and that's how a child is raised in balance and fullness, by understanding what the father provides and understanding what the mother provides. So this is the bigger picture behind, like you said, where we're going to go in a minute. When we do look at those two specific verses, it's really important not to just look at them in the slice of time that they were given. You got to see the much bigger picture swirling around it, right. And then we can zoom in on it. Like you said, exegetically, we can make observations about it. We can see what's happening above it and below it, and then that can help us interpret and apply it effectively in our own life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, one thing before we move on to the verses, I'm going to recommend how not to read the Bible. This was one of the first books that we did at Kainos School of Ministry, and it's amazing. It's really a great tool, and so that's where I pulled a lot of my information for today.
Can I say something about it? A lot of people have questions, and there is about the women's anti-women thing, but also think questions about science, violence, pro-slavery in the Bible, questions that people have but are afraid to ask. This is a great tool to just go back and say, oh, again, in the context of actually what was happening in the history, you will understand, oh, that makes so much more sense, and why it is in there, right?
And I will say that this book for me really brought an awakening to why people who are not considered believers always say that the Bible contradicts itself. This book really helped straighten that out. And so, but one thing that is in here is that the word side used in Genesis was also the same word used for the sides of the Ark of the Covenant. And so I thought, wow. So when we are reigning together equally as man and woman, we're carrying the very presence of God in a more powerful way than we ever could alone, because we're not created to be alone. And I'll probably dive deeper into that, but that was just a moment of wow.
Something that would be fun to look into would also, if the same type of context would be for the side of Jesus when he opened it up, because it was blood and water that came out, which is also birthing, which also points back to Genesis. So
good.
Side note.
Okay, let's move on, guys. We are going to dive into 1 Corinthians 14, and this 14, 34 through 35, and it says, women should be silent during church meetings. It's not proper for them to speak. They should be submissive, just as the law says. If they have any questions, they should ask their husbands at home. And just remember, we need to look at who this was written to and why. So let's go. You want to share?
I didn't have it marked. What was that again?
It's 1 Corinthians 14, 34 through 35.
So I can give some context for it.
Okay.
So, as Paul went out and he was preaching the gospel, a lot of times he would go into synagogues, and the way the synagogues were set up, and it wasn't uncommon for this to be mirrored in Greek culture as well, which was Hellenistic. Even though it was a Roman Empire, it was still a lot of Hellenistic cultural things left over, is that women would sit on the left and men would sit on the right. And so you have this setting, like for the church at Corinth would have been set up this way, where Paul's writing the letter to. And so if you read the rest of 1st and 2nd Corinthians, you realize that they were a powerful, messy church. They were operating in signs and wonders. They were operating in the spiritual gifts, but they were acting like orphans. There were all kinds of things where people were speaking out of turn. They would display their gift almost like people have rap battles today. Like somebody would get up and say a message in tongues, and then the next person would get up and try to outdo that. So Paul wasn't saying you can't pray in tongues in public or speak in tongues in public without an interpreter. He was saying the order that you're presenting this isn't edifying people. And so if you're going to have something like this specific thing happening, not in general, but this specific case, then we need to add order to this, right? And so you had different posses in the church, so to speak. I'm of Apollos, or I'm of Paul, or, and Paul's like, what are you doing? We're all of Christ.
Yeah.
There's no distinction. Just because Apollos has disciples here and I have disciples here. No, you're not really our disciples or Apollos' disciples. You're disciples of Christ. And so another thing you had happening in that church at the time was the fact that, women were hearing things and they would ask their husbands questions right in the middle of the talk, right in the middle of the conversation. They would talk across the aisle because they weren't seated next to their husbands, not because that's the better way, the godly way to do it. It's just because that's how they culturally did it at the time. And that feeds into just something really quick, even that it talks about it in How Not to Read the Bible. God will work with the culture and reveal a better way over time,
Yeah.
right? If you come right in and say, oh, don't do that, then people often reject it, or they have a trigger or a knee-jerk reaction to it. But if you can come in, reveal the better way, then you can pull them out of it, right? And so what was happening here, he wasn't saying, well, men have to sit on the left, women are on the right, women on the left. He was using their culture, and then he begins to slowly, over time, the kingdom's always revealed as leaven. And leaven slowly rises, and over time, the culture of the kingdom, becomes the culture of the church, or the thing that you're addressing. And so right there specifically, like, he's not saying women can't ever share or talk in church. He was correcting a very specific problem, but he doesn't ban them talking. If you read the bigger picture and the bigger context of Corinthians, he's admonishing women in the rest of the chapter. That's why you can never just read the Bible first.
Yeah.
Right.
If you're going to question what Paul has to say in 1 Corinthians about women, you have to read the entire book.
Right.
A few verses earlier, he wishes that all will prophesy.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All means all. There's not all men.
Yeah.
All.
And that's like 26. It's like, what brothers and sisters come together. Each of you can have a song. You have a lesson, have a revelation, have a tongue, and interpretation. But let it all be strengthening of the church. Well, it says right there, brothers and sisters.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, throughout the whole entire thing, it continues to say brothers and sisters, brothers and sisters.
And there's another small factor going on here as well. At the church of Corinth specifically, in contrast to what we'll talk about in a minute in the letter to Timothy addressing the church of Ephesus. You were right, by the way, in our conversation.
I was thinking that this morning. I was like, we were right.
Yes. Yes. We had the discussion about if Timothy was at Ephesus, and I got confused. I had the girls remind me.
We were on it.
You were on it. Like a woman wearing a bonnet. I'm just kidding. Cut that out. We'll address that too. What was I talking about? Oh, so at Corinth, the women were likely uneducated.
Right.
And so what do you need to be a leader and a speaker in the church? You need time. You need to be a disciple before you become a leader.
Yeah.
And it's just growing and learning. So it's that simple. This specific church had these specific problems, and Paul's correcting all sorts of messes throughout the whole thing. But we read it and we highlight it because even though we believe Jesus is Lord, we still have separated thinking unless we metanoia that thinking to the original blueprint found in Christ.
In Genesis.
If we're still trying to become something, then we'll try to we get our identity from doing. But when we realize that our identity comes from being and we're not trying to become, and that we're co-united with Christ, that he lives his life through us, that transformational thinking stops the striving and causes us to live from a place of rest, realizing our identity as daughters and sons of a heavenly family, that transforms how we view Scripture, how we view one another, and how we view the world. So just some context because this is one of those two verses where that really get, and down in verse 39 it says, if they desire to learn anything, let them ask their own husbands at home. It's improper for a woman to speak in church. So I've got a list over on the other side where, the same thing comes up in Timothy. We'll address it there. But the silence there is actually referring to something else, right? We read it, a word like be silent, don't speak, and we immediately think of westernized American churches.
Right.
We're not realizing what they meant in the context at the time it was being said. And if Paul's addressing this, like, hey, if you have a question, wait until you get home, talk to your husband about it. Don't interrupt the service to ask what someone's meaning, right? It's not a free fall. There was order and structure in the church, and even some of the things in our day, there's kind of a reaction to, well, we should just all have a conversation. We can. The conversation is great if that's what the intention is.
Right.
Practicing the gifts are great if that's what the intention is. However, if it just becomes a free-for-all, then no one's getting benefited because everyone's just trying to speak so they feel heard. If I'm going to speak, I want to speak for the benefit of seeing, knowing, and hearing others and pouring into others. I'm not speaking for the benefit for someone to say, man, that was a great message. I'm speaking for the benefit of discipleship, edification, and building up. And those are the kinds of things that Paul was addressing.
That's amazing. So one of the things that I really just wanted to touch on was understanding that these people were coming from Jewish backgrounds, so they were under the Old Covenant, the law, and some of them were coming from pagan worship. And I talk about this a lot because of my own journey in unraveling. They were completely entering a whole new world, a whole new way of seeing God, and there was confusion, and they were questioning things. So I think that gives a good picture of the atmosphere and the disruption, plus on top of the other things that were happening. You know what I mean? Like, it was complete chaos because basically they were being told, hey, you know, you've done it this way your whole life, but now Jesus is here and he's showing us a better way. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I think just being able to understand that is really powerful. Mm-hmm. Do you have something you want to share on Corinthians?
I mean, I think that leads actually into Timothy really well, because that's where it was pretty chaotic.
Yeah.
Because because of the culture that they were in. I mean, culture. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think you were going to share some things.
Go ahead.
With that.
Yeah, let's read it for context. This is 1 Timothy 2.
11 through 12. Where is it?
That's 9 through... I'm just going to read this whole passage here till the end of the chapter.
Okay.
Likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreetly, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or expensive apparel, but rather by means of good works, as is proper for a woman making a claim to godliness. A woman must quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness. But I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man, but to remain quiet. For it was Adam who was first created, and then Eve. And it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman who was deceived and became a wrongdoer. This is a straight to the point translation.
Yeah, this one is too.
But women will be preserved through childbirth if they continue in faith, love, and sanctity of moderation. Now, for you to read that as a 21st Western American, it seems like Paul just jumps from one thing to another. Mm-hmm. As we'll see in a second, this is all interconnected because he's addressing something very specific. Mm-hmm. But if we read it with Western eyes, right? There's a good book out there called Misreading Scripture Through Western Eyes.
Yeah.
I recommend everyone read it. And so, first of all, if you look at the broader context of, we'll list it in a minute, if you look at the broader context of what Paul's talking about here, he's admonishing women all around all of these verses in his epistles, right? In Romans, in Philippians, even in Corinthians, he's admonishing women. The letters of Timothy they're called the pastoral epistles, but they really are apostolic epistles because Timothy was Paul's spiritual son, like an heir, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So Timothy was definitely carrying the apostolic role, but he had the heart of a pastor. So Paul's given very specific instructions here about how to build a church in Timothy's day, age, and culture. Mm-hmm. And if Timothy is at Ephesus, then it's very important for us to understand what was happening in Ephesus at the time.
Absolutely.
And when we understand that context, it makes this entire passage make sense. What was Ephesus known for, right? In Acts, I think it's 19, you see the outbreak of power. Mm-hmm. Extraordinary miracles happen at Ephesus. Ephesus was a city full of pagan and idolatrous worship. It was also a city full of witchcraft. In fact, when the revival hit, they burned millions of dollars worth of witchcraft paraphernalia. One of the things that happened was that, I forgot the name of the shopkeeper or the idol maker. He got really offended, right? Because they made the idols to Artemis, and Paul came, and nobody wanted the idols anymore, and so they raised up, a voice against him. Mm-hmm. The Ardesium, or the Temple of Artemis, was the second of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Mm. And some of the research I'm going to share here comes from Dr. Ben Witherington and Dr. Gary Hoag, but they really kind of give us the context for what was happening. So what happened at the Temple of Artemis, right? you would have these priestesses, women priestesses, who would be in there, and oftentimes they would take psychedelic drugs and go into a hallucinogenic state, and they would be naked, uncovered, and they would begin to release these oracles or these prophecies to people around. Another thing that was happening is that they believed that Artemis was the mother of all life, right? She was the mother of all humanity. And so people came around the world to go to the Temple of Artemis, and one scholar described it as if they were coming to visit the Creation Museum. Right? Artemis is where we all came from. Let's go visit this, right? And so you have this dynamic to where what was happening when the kingdom came into, the kingdomization of Ephesus was happening. Some of these priestesses and some of these women of high standing and high education were coming into the church. So in contrast to Corinth, where there may have been some uneducated women, these, as Ben Witherington says, these were women of high status, and they were coming in there. And so they would come into the church. How do you think they were used to dressing in the religious setting? Right? Unclothed, not naked, but unclothed, loosely dressed, right? Hair flowing everywhere. And we'll address the hair thing in a moment. Hair flowing everywhere, and they were used to being the ones who led. Now, in Greek culture, in society, you had men who were the predominant leaders of society, but in religious setting, women were the predominant leaders. And so you're having somewhat of a culture clash within the church. And so several of the things that Paul addresses in this passage are specifically going through this cultural understanding in this cultural context in that slice of time in that city with those specific women in that specific church. It's not a blanket statement for all women across time. It's a swinging the pendulum back to the middle, so to speak, because if women were underactivated in society, they were overactivated, and men had no voice in the religious setting.
Right.
So they were swinging the pendulum back down. So let's walk back through the passage and see if we can piece this together. Adorn themselves with proper clothing, right? So again, we address that, the immodesty in the pagan temple versus the modesty in church, right? Don't uncover yourself. Keep your self covered, hair braided. The fashion of the temple, right? It was piety towards Artemis, Silence.
Can we go back to that?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So the adornment. So the women that they were trying to be pious, and so he's saying here like, don't come in and have your hair braided and everything trying to be pious or her. Just be self-control. Just have goodwill and do those type of things. You don't have to have your hair all intricate and showing your also it was a wealth thing, I believe, from the time. So it was like adornment, like you don't have to come in looking all, put together and everything like that if you're wanting to be pious, like you do toward when you're serving the god Artemis. You can just come in as you are and just let it be inside, not outside, essentially is what he's saying.
Wow.
And not only were there temple priestesses, there were temple prostitutes. There was their sex was intermingled within the practice. And so coming in, looking like that, looking adorned, that was part of it. And Paul's pulling that sexuality. He's not saying, feeling good about yourself is wrong there. He's saying painting yourself up the way you used to in that pagan setting isn't how we operate in church.
Right.
And so don't come in there either revealing too much or adorning too much or any of those things. He's talking about that.
Hey guys, we are back with part 2. We had a glitch in the system and little tech trouble. So we're going to start where we left off in 1 Timothy.
Yeah.
And
well, we just covered some of the key points that Paul mentioned there, and one had to do with hair and hair coverings, and then we went on to silence, which is a topic there. And a lot of people use that passage to say, well, women can't speak in church, I think sometimes we don't realize how far we follow the trail, right? Women can speak in all types of environments, and you'll see people who are compartmentarianisms are compartmentalists, and they're the ones who believe that women are subordinate. And there's egalitarianism, and they're the ones who believe that women are co-equal. And so, but the compartmentalists, they don't necessarily, like, some of them will draw the line with, well, a woman can teach as long as she's under a man. And then some of them say, well, no, a woman can't teach at all. And so there's all types of, like, different ways to look at it. I don't think Paul was being that direct. As we've already mentioned, in the context of Ephesus, it was a specific problem that he was addressing and correcting that had to do with what was happening in the Temple of Artemis, the new church that was there. It was a mixture of Gentile converts and Jewish believers who believed that Jesus was the Messiah. So it was this melting pot of things happening. Gleaning off of what we already talked about in 1 Corinthians, it was how the people were set up within the congregation where they were talking across, causing interruptions. Where here, we're really going to see the tension between what was happening within the Temple of Artemis and what was happening in the church, and how that speaks to silence.
Right, and at the Temple of Artemis, as we said before, the women were actually predominantly the ones that were ministering. And so as people would come in, even from other countries, they would step into the temple, and the women would be reciting these prayers loudly and incantations, and it was a really loud environment.
Yeah, that's good. I read that silence in Greek, I don't know how to pronounce the word in Greek, but that's what it means, is to not be disorderly.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Well, Allessia found out something else today too, that the word there doesn't mean you can't speak at all. Right.
Yeah, like quietly, Paul uses the context of the word quietly rather than silence in some translations, and I don't have that word, or I don't have that pulled up, but it is not necessarily a noise level thing. It's actually just more of a how you are being, if that makes sense. Like,
right. It says women should learn quietly in this translation, mm-hmm. and it's the NLT. To live peaceful lives. It's not being disorderly.
Mm-hmm. And what I was reading was that he actually used that word in there twice, and it kind of sandwiched it in to mm-hmm. kind of create like the context of what he was saying, rather than just being direct and just saying be silent. I think it was, the intention was something different, the way that he worded it and the way that he sandwiched it in.
Yeah. One other thing too is I was made aware where he said women should learn, and I know we talked about that before, but they were saying that this was actually astonishing in that culture.
Yes,
that he was actually inviting the women to learn,
because that's something that wasn't as common, right?
Mm-hmm.
The women weren't learners, and we'll talk about that later at how Jesus empowered women to learn. But that is like, I read that as well earlier when I was reading my book Equal, that he was in fact inviting women to learn, them. Which was actually radical, and it would have been astonishing to the people that were around him.
Yeah, that's good.
So what's happening here, if you recap it, they were coming in from the Temple of Artemis, not just the priestesses, but also the culture. Remember that men were predominant in society, while women were predominant in the religious setting. And so, yeah, they had to come in, they had to become disciples. Mm-hmm. They had to learn the ways of Jesus. You can't lead someone in the ways of Jesus unless you've learned the ways of Jesus. Well, what does the culture within Christianity look like? What's going to look a lot different than it looked previously. And that way it had to do with also social communication, mm-hmm. right? And it's not like this way is more holy than that way. Obviously, modesty is helpful, right? But holiness is otherworldliness. Holiness is when the Spirit of God is living His life through you, and your life begins to mirror the image of Jesus, right? And so they hadn't gone through that process yet. Then that needed to happen. So again, addressing something very specific.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It seems like some of the things in the list that I read through earlier or in this passage are unrelated, but as we'll see in a second, they're very related. In the next verse, he says, "But it was Adam who was first created, and then Eve. And it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman who was deceived and became a wrongdoer. But the woman will be preserved through childbirth, and they continue in faith, hope, and sanctity and moderation." Sorry, it's kind of hard to read. And so it seems like he's kind of jumping, like, you know. And so a lot of people read this as, well, you got the man, you see a popular Christian meme, you got the husband, and then the wife, and then the kids, like it's a hierarchy. And Paul couldn't have been talking about that that wasn't his goal, that wasn't his heart in saying that.
Right.
In the Greek world, they all believe that Artemis gave birth to life, and that woman was created first, not man, and from woman, man came, or born from woman, right? Well, we know in the creation account that Adam was created first, one being became two, as we've discussed, so the two would always be drawn back together to one. Adam found no suitable helpmeet for him, right? He found no suitable partner. And so he's actually introducing this to a people who've probably never heard of that, because they've gone off the understanding of their religion that was predominant in their area and their way. So Paul is resetting the order of creation here to make several key points. So he wasn't talking about hierarchy or saying that men were of the house. No, we see, and like we already talked about, we see in the creation pattern that Adam and Eve were to co-reign and co-rule, right? And so what do husband and wife do? They co-reign and they co-rule. He wasn't saying that men are always above women, which is often how you hear the verse quoted. He was actually correcting the order of creation. Now, this ties into the next verse, because the childbearing part.
Artemis was supposedly the one who actually saved her mother in childbearing, and the twins that the mom had, you know, the god that they worship. And so women were actually afraid to stop worshiping Artemis, because they were afraid, because she became basically the saint of, or the god that was worshipped for childbearing, in protection, make sure that you wouldn't pass away during childbirth. And so as these women were coming in, Paul was actually addressing, like, hey, you don't have to worry about childbirth, and you don't have to serve Artemis in order to be safe having children. You know, you can worship God and not be concerned with that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so by worshiping Jesus, because you can still see, like, oh wait, Jesus is Lord, we want to become Christian, this is really resonating within us, right? But then there still could have been some superstitions left over from the previous way of life, the previous religion. There still could have been some idol worship and stuff like that kind of within their hearts. And so it seems like he may be rebuking something here, but actually what he's doing is he's teaching the way of the kingdom and the order of the kingdom. The order of the kingdom is Yahweh, the Creator, our Heavenly Father, created Adam and Eve in His image, and then through that seed, His Son Jesus came to redeem that image and restore it to the earth. So what's that question here? It's the image, right? It's the image and the order of creation and the pattern for creation. The pattern for creation is that God, he says that God created us in His image, male and female. He created them, right? But the reason it was done in, Adam first and then Eve was to reveal to Adam how to cherish Eve and how to realize that whatever he was missing in need of wouldn't be met by anything else, not by himself, not by any of the animals or even creation, right? He needed a female in order to complete the way that Yahweh created him. When he was able to recognize and identify that, that's the moment that God chose to put him to sleep and then, take from his side and form a brand new being, right? It was his equal, but it was also his opposite, right? And when they come together, what do? They procreate.
Yeah.
Right? And so they become, as his imagers, they become creators, just like he was creator. And so this order is very important for men and women to co-reign and co-rule. Now remember, in the Greek system, the pendulum had swung too far, and women had ended up in a place by themselves above men in a religious setting. So here he's bringing the pendulum back to the middle, where men and women are equal. Whereas in other settings, women were suppressed. And so he's raising up women and bringing that pendulum back to the center of God's created order. Only when you have male and female, men and women, co-ruling and co-reigning in union with the Trinity, are you going to see God's image and reality mirrored in the earth.
Wow.
Now, it's very interesting here if we back up to a verse that kind of brings a lot of this together, right? Because we say that God is the author of all things. Well, in verse, if I could read and see that.
12.
In verse 12, but I do not allow a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man, but to remain quiet, for Adam was first, not woman, right? So authority there actually means authorship, according to Kroger, right? So Paul's correcting order, Adam first and then Eve, right? And so what's happening there is it has to do with the alignment with the Creator and authorship. It had nothing to do with authority. And that's the one that says, well, a woman can never hold authority over a man, right? He wasn't even addressing that. It wasn't about who has authority over one or to another. He's correcting the very specific circumstance and their understanding of creation. Because if your understanding of creation is off, you're not going to look at the role of gender in society properly, and you're not going to see God's plan, heart, and intention, blueprint, and design for all creation, for family, for society, right? If you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going. If you don't know what happened in the beginning, you're not going to realize how all things culminate and wrap up in the end. The family is a key piece because within family, the heart of the Trinity, Father loving Son, Son loving Spirit, Spirit loving Father, all of that is revealed through husband loving wife and then procreating in the earth. This is this beautiful mystery. And Paul's bringing a correct perspective on all of this. So we actually don't capture the fullness of God's image if women are suppressed or if men take authority over women. It has to do with the author of the ages revealing his heart and how he wants the story written.
That's
good.
Yeah, that is good. That's good.
And so I think, that sets us up to realize, hey, wait a minute. If we see the heart of Father God all throughout the New Testament, there's women, even women who were considered, prostitutes, outcasts, Gentiles, even in the line of Jesus, right? And so you see God, even in the Old Testament, redeeming a woman's place and identity, and even putting women, obviously they'll be in the lineage of Jesus because someone has to be the mother, but you see prominent voices begin to emerge in there, people who were in leadership positions, chosen on purpose, right, to play a key role. When you go from there, you go into the life of Jesus, and you see Jesus doing the same things, where he's promoting women all around him. Jesus was the first traveling rabbi to actually have women disciples. It was very revolutionary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about Jesus for a second because, and during his time and culture, and specifically, within the Jewish community, women were more like, they were very suppressed, and they were more like possessions. In some cases, not all cases, but so it was a very patriarchal society that he was in at the time. And so when Jesus came onto the scene, he was absolutely radical. Like it was radical, and it was a huge shift. And he absolutely was making a statement toward women. But just a couple of instances. I'm going to just read it right out of this book because I love how she just talks it through. But a few of the firsts, the revelation of God's incredible incarnation. Right, it came to Mary. He could have first even went to, Mary's fiance or Mary's dad. She was just a teenage girl, but he went to Mary, and I think that even that is significant. He could have went to a priest, but no, he chose to go to her and say, hey, I'm coming actually, and I'm coming in through you. You know? And then of course my favorite story in the Bible, which is Fotini, and when I love to talk about her, the woman at the well in John 4, that was huge because rabbis actually didn't even talk to their own family when they were out in public. And so for him to actually talk to a stranger woman and then Samaritan, someone that they didn't even associate with, like in the middle of the day, was a huge, that was like, whoa. But then from there, like, she's the first one that he said, I am the Messiah.
Yeah.
And that is the good news, right?
Yeah.
And so when she said, well, I'm going to go tell everyone, in the past, you'll read in other circumstances where he's like, hey, don't tell anybody. Mm-hmm. But he said, I am the Messiah. And then he let her go and tell everyone. So she was the first evangelist. Like, that's a really big deal.
That's a really big deal.
And then the first Gentile convert. And I didn't know this, but I was reading about it today. You can find that in Matthew 15. It was a centurion woman that whose daughter had an evil spirit, and I believe actually that might be the lady who he said, hey, no, I'm sent to the Jewish people, and she said, yes, but even dogs eat crumbs from the master's table. I believe that's the one. If it's not, it definitely is that he was sent to the Jewish people. And she said, well, please, and he healed his daughter, and he healed the daughter, and she became a convert. So that was like the first Gentile convert. The first resurrection teaching, all culminating in the first witness to the resurrection. And of course, that's Mary Magdalene. And, she was the one in the garden that he showed himself to. And then he sent her, which is the definition of apostolic. He actually sent her to the disciples and said, hey, which we're all men. He said, hey, go tell them I am alive. So all throughout, like, his ministry, he empowered, then there's, like, the woman caught in adultery, like, all of these, there's so many circumstances when he encountered a woman, he chose to lift them up and edify them and give them a place and a voice. And like you said, even Mary of Bethany was able to sit at Jesus's feet as a disciple. And like I think you briefly touched this, but like, being a disciple wasn't just going and sitting at his feet and getting head knowledge and knowing about it. It was actually preparing you for ministry to go and do it too. That's the whole point of the discipleship at the time. So it's really amazing. And then the last one, was another Mary, where she actually was able to minister to Jesus as she poured the alabaster, the oil out on Jesus's feet. That was like way against cultural norms. In fact, it was a male audience, and there she was again at his feet, and he commended her for it, right? And he said, hey, she's going to be remembered forever, for this thing she did. So Jesus was constantly saying, hey, you are equal, you have worth, you have value, and I'm going to send you.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Even in some of the things you mentioned, Jesus, again, he was raising up. I mean, he's the Son of God. Like, he was the Word spoken at creation that formed all things, right? And so his heart was to liberate women when he came. And a couple of things he was addressing in some of the examples that you mentioned were very specific. Even with Fotini, she couldn't divorce, right? According to cultural norms. Now, there were rare circumstances where a woman of status and inheritance would have been able to do that. But after the Israelites were captive in Babylon, they came back and they found the loophole. If they adopted the Babylonian system of divorce, they did not have to pay back the dowry, and they would just divorce. But if the lady didn't have a certificate of divorce, she would be viewed as an adulterer. So when Jesus is saying, I hate divorce, he says that because, no, you should, what God has joined together, let no man separate. But we never stop to think, well, did God join it together in the first place?
Yeah.
A. And then B, what he was saying is that you shouldn't be looking to just offload your wife later in life or for whatever reason that you want to be able to do that. And if you do get divorced, they need to have a certificate of divorce. Otherwise, you're forcing them within society to commit adultery. He wasn't talking about like, oh, well, because you guys broke up, now, I'm going to withhold my forgiveness or something like that. There's a much bigger thing that was going on there.
He was really putting them on equal playing fields, honestly.
Correct. He was swinging the pendulum, just like we saw with Paul. And one of the other ladies that you mentioned was?
Mary of Bethany, Fotini, the centurion woman.
So with a woman caught in adultery, we often we've been preconditioned. So we read scripture through our Western eyes thinking that, well, this is what we've always heard. Women are lesser than men. It's just the role. We've already talked about how they have different qualities that we offer in a marriage. We're not supposed to be just like each other. We're supposed to balance each other out. The woman caught in adultery, some argue whether or not that should even be in the Bible. And regardless of where your conclusion is on that statement, I think it's very clear that the principle made there still holds. She got caught in adultery, and Jesus is like, go and sin no more. And we read it from, she was busted, and she better not do it again. What was happening there is that she was being abused by a religious system.
Yeah.
Did she get caught in a mistake? Sure, but how do you restore someone who's caught in a mistake? You even made the point in your book about how, when sheep would wander, there was the myth that the shepherd would go and break the legs of the sheep so they wouldn't wander off anymore.
Yeah.
Well, the shepherd would never do that, because then that sheep would be defenseless and have to be left behind if a wolf were to attack.
Right.
That makes no sense, right? And so the good shepherd would not also do that. He wasn't doing that to that lady right there, right? What was he doing? He removed the sin label, the imageless label off of her, and said, now you're free to no longer have an appetite for the thing from which you found yourself captive by today. And you've locked eyes with me, saying, I don't condemn you.
Yeah.
And if the accusers were condemning, they thought they were speaking on behalf of God. I don't remember seeing the man brought there. So the point I'm making is that he was liberating the women, and he was discipling them for what? To carry the evangelion, the good news. We think, well, a woman can teach at home, or if she teaches, she can do it in Sunday school, or she can teach in the women's ministry and teach other women. Where are we getting this from? You're adding that to the text. The text doesn't say that. You either take it for a point-blank Western understanding, or you have to ask, is there more going on here?
Right.
What was the bigger picture that Paul was addressing? Because if not, he's contradicting himself. And if we go into looking at the women in the rest of the New Testament, who do you have?
Can I say one last thing about Jesus? Because it just popped in my head. I think it's so beautiful how he weaves redemption. That's what we were just talking about, into it. And that this started in the garden, right, with Eve, where the system was broken. And then it ended in the garden with Mary. And he said, hey, no, you still have worth and value, and he sent her back. I think that is just such a beautiful picture of redemption.
Wow.
What starts in a garden ends in a garden.
The keeper of the garden is actually the keeper of our hearts.
Yeah.
So he was tending to the garden of the earth, which is the heart of humanity in that point. And so you see redemption not only of woman's identity, right? But if heaven is a family, then the ecclesia is supposed to be a family as well. It's not like, well, as soon as you get on the premises, okay, I'm sorry, wife, you have to keep your mouth closed now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's nonsense. It's an interacting, thriving community where everyone can share in different settings in different ways based on what the goals of the collective meeting were. And in Corinth, Paul, was establishing, well, if someone's releasing, a teaching, don't interrupt that with your questions and stuff like that. And that has to do with human nature. It has to do with healthy communication.
Right.
Sometimes we're so quick to kind of be triggered by what someone else says. We'll begin to overtalk them when we haven't actually heard what they were trying to communicate to us in the first place. So you see all these other factors going in here. And Paul, what did Paul do? Well, he mirrored Jesus. Jesus came and brought grace. He fulfilled the law and released the new era of the kingdom. Paul was the most radical, killing Christians, doing all of these different things because he was so zealous for God to fulfill the law. Once he realized he met Jesus on the road to Damascus, that the law had already been fulfilled, then what was his response there? Well, the same grace that transformed me can transform everybody, right?
Yeah.
And so you see Paul when we realize Paul's heart, we see how he was treating women. Well, what about other people in the New Testament who were in ministry? Well, Philip had 4 daughters who prophesied, right? You had Priscilla, who was married to Aquila, and Priscilla was the one who had taught Apollos. And Priscilla and Apollos, along with Paul, are two of the candidates for the author of Romans.
Yeah.
Right? And just imagine if Priscilla was the author of Romans. It's like, well, do we throw that out?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Phoebe was a deaconess, and many call her the patron of Paul's ministry, right? And the word there, for her, some people say it's overseer, but the idea of the culture in that day didn't really use that word that way. It was more like she was influential. She was the business person. She was supporting his ministry and probably opened the doors for some of his ministry. And Paul probably said, oh, well, Phoebe sent me, which opened the door for him. So he was her spiritual leader, but then he was partnering with her in for lack of a better term, in the business setting, in the influencer setting, to be able to open doors for Paul. So you see their relationship being mutually beneficial there. Tabitha was also a deaconess. You know, you had in Romans 16, you have Junia and Andronicus, who were prominent among the apostles, or outstanding among the apostles. Yes, wow. Junia is an apostle. People try to debate it, and the reason they try to debate it is because, well, apostles were only men, so Paul must be incorrect here. I'm sorry, the translation must be incorrect here, right? And so there's nothing in history that says that she wasn't a female. It was a female name used at the time, right? And so she was definitely considered among the apostles. Paul's fellow co-workers in Philippians 4:2, Evodia and Syntyche. And Syntyche, his fellow co-worker, what did that mean? Well, she was definitely a leader, at minimal a deaconess, but who was Paul? Well, Paul was an apostle, right? And so she could have been any one of these different things. And so what are we doing here? Jesus liberated women. Paul liberated women. He worked with women. They were surrounded by that. Women carried the message of the gospel. You know, St. Fatina carried the message of the gospel to Africa and then to Nero. All throughout church history. Well, who do you have, right? Hildegard, Catherine of Siena, Thelka, Perpetua, Monica, Clare of Assisi, Sojourner Truth, Joan of Arc, St. Teresa of Avila, Catherine Booth, Franny Crosby, Amy Semple McPherson, Catherine Coleman, Mariah Warworth-Ether, Heidi Baker. From the past to the present, you have woman after woman after woman doing amazing, miraculous, and wonderful things for God. So it's crazy how we'll take two verses out of context, out of their general purpose, or out of their specific purpose, and then make blanket statements about women.
Yeah.
When the biblical meta-narrative, the creation account, God's treatment of women in the Old Testament, Jesus' treatment of women, Paul's treatment of women, and then the New Testament witness from beginning to end seems to be raising women up. And then all throughout church history, you have women being raised up in powerful, influential ways. It's time for us to recognize that men and women are created equal. Like I said earlier, when I married Allessia, I didn't marry a lesser species. I married a co-equal, right?
Yeah.
And she's powerful. And you know, she let me know that earlier today when we were doing this thing called life and marriage. She's a powerful person, and that's okay. Yeah. If I can't let her be powerful, that's not the husband laying down his life in order for his wife to flourish and thrive. Yeah. If I'm providing for her, it's not so she can serve my needs. If I'm providing for her, it's so she can live life to the fullest as her creator intended her to do. And so my heart in saying yes to you, inviting us on this podcast, as a man, is to say, and my beautiful daughter Emma's running around out there, is to say, hey, we're co-created by Yahweh, and we can co-create together, right? And when that works in harmony and in unity, you're going to see God's heart mirrored and expand within the earth, not by one gender pushing the other down, but by seeing the beauty of what both bring to the table, what they carry, and how they each represent a unique aspect in the heart of God.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I love that.
Fully agree.
Yeah. Back to the beginning.
Yeah. It's exciting.
Yeah.
I think it's coming too. I just really feel like, you know, it's on God's heart right now.
Yeah.
Obviously it's permeating our culture. The questions are being asked, you know.
Yeah.
But I really think that it's time for the women to just partner with men. You know? And so that God's heart really can be on display. Be released. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think we're going to land there, guys. Thank you guys for coming. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I hope that it just maybe awakened you to dive into some places in the Bible historically and just study maybe in a way that you haven't before, and to see things from a different point of view, and maybe just have some intimate time with the Lord. And I know it's encouraged me which we've already had this discussion a little bit in our private life, but to just say, Lord, how can I co-create with my husband? You know, what does that look like? How can I, as a wife, press into to the blueprint that you have for us together? And so maybe that will encourage someone else to do the same. Thank you guys. Bye.
Thanks so much. See ya.